everyone. Flew in from Chapel Hill last night, moved there a week ago, going back tomorrow at 7 a.m., so quick trip to New York. How many people in the room work in public media? And how many people in the room work in commercial media? And how many people in the room don't work in media? Great. All right, this will be awesome. So I put all of my notes that I'm about to say to you online. My Twitter handle is mkramer. I also put all of the questions that I'm going to ask these panelists. So if English is not your first language or you would like to share these notes with someone in your newsroom, you can go to mkramer on Twitter, and everything I'm about to say to you is right there. I wanted to thank Hal and Jeff for inviting me, and to Sarah for organizing this panel. Before I introduce you to the folks who are on the panel with me, I'm going to talk for like about 3 minutes about the research that I conducted at Harvard this past spring. I took a leave of absence from my day job. I headed up for a Nieman Fellowship. And if that seems short to you, there's an Ignite version of my speech online, there's an hour-long version of this speech online, and there's a 72-page report. If that seems overwhelming to you, I recommend the executive summary and the key takeaways. So while I was up at Harvard, I basically examined what membership could look like in public media if there were models other than monetary ones. So could people become a member of their public media station by donating time, code, or a skill? I was really curious what that would look like for the individual who would be taking part in that experiment. And I was also curious what that would look like for the station. And I was thinking about how could stations be strengthened if they started to value and then articulate that value, how these other contributions help the station, whether or not they led to financial donations. But the question that I was really most interested in was, how do stations benefit if they expand the idea of membership and incentivize people to participate by acting as ambassadors on behalf of the station? So during my research, I talked to a ton of people in public media and a ton of people who listen to public media or listen to podcasts or have never listened to the radio in their life. And I also talked to people who work at libraries and food co-ops and airlines and people who work for the national parks. And the reason that I did this was because I think these people are grappling with the same issues, and some of them have solved them. There are issues like, how do we make people ambassadors for an organization even if they can't donate money? How do we get these people into our physical spaces to understand what it is that we do, and then use those spaces as a hub or platform to become more deeply connected to each other? And how do we think of public media spaces as public spaces, ones that strengthen and connect their communities? What I love about this panel today is that the people on the panel have to think a lot about users and incentives and strategies in a way that public media stations and other news organizations could really learn from. I'm going to let each panelist introduce him or herself and talk a little bit very briefly about his or her organization. And then we're going to have what I hope is a wide-ranging conversation about a ton of different things: incentives, email and newsletter strategies, ambassador-type programs, building things in the open and how that might help your organization, building funnels and retention plans for existing or potential members, creating ways for people to have direct access to people and what that looks like on a digital platform or in the real world, and how to translate what happens online to the real world and vice versa to create these kind of funnels or cycles that create continuity and make people feel more invested in the product that you're creating. I talk about this stuff all the time on Twitter. I'm a total oversharer on that medium. If you would prefer to get something that's not so in your face, I also write a newsletter where I throw a question out to about 2,500 people. They respond, and then I toss it back out to the entire audience. And we've solved really interesting problems, like how do you make jury duty better, or how do you improve local news for people. So feel free to look at that. And I also just received a Knight prototype grant to further these ideas and build out a platform that I hope will help public media stations. Entire project is open source. All of our code is available. You could take it and adapt it today. And I'm working that project entirely in the open. So if you're curious about that, we hold public working sessions every Thursday night at 9 p.m. online. And you're welcome to join us. So I'm going to start. If you could introduce yourself, say what organization you're from, and just maybe 2 minutes how you think about membership, and then we'll dive into the questions.
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm a VP of Marketing at DonorsChoose.org. If you haven't heard of DonorsChoose.org, we're a web-based education nonprofit that helps public school teachers get supplies for their classrooms. So think crowdfunding platform for public schools. But we've actually been around for 15 years. And last year we raised over $75 million for public schools. This year our goal is $90 million. So we've grown 30% year over year the past couple of years, which is really, really exciting, and have about 60% of public schools with at least one teacher who's using our site currently. There's a couple of things that are a little bit different about DonorsChoose.org from other crowdfunding platforms. The first is that we're a nonprofit. So we do a lot of fundraising for teachers, and the second piece of that is that we do use our teachers a lot as ambassadors for their own projects, but we also raise a lot of money for them. So about 85% of our revenue last year came from our own fundraising, and about 15% came from money that our teachers raised for DonorsChoose.org. And the last piece that's a little different than other crowdfunding platforms is that we actually facilitate the delivery of the materials that the teacher asks for. So teachers can ask for anything from a field trip to books for their classroom to pencils and papers to a projector, think sort of anything they need. And we make sure those materials, we have a pretty tight feedback loop and integrity assurance process where we actually deliver those materials directly to the school for the teacher instead of a check or something like that. I work specifically on our marketing team. We're focused on driving the revenue from individual contributors on our site, but I also work really specifically on our teacher side in terms of educating, connecting, and empowering our teachers to be sort of ambassadors for our site and their projects, be more successful on DonorsChoose.org. To give you guys a little bit of a taste of what I might talk about on this panel or answers to Melody's questions, I'll highlight 3 specific things. The first is that, like I already mentioned, we think a lot about using kind of all of our audiences as ambassadors. So teachers, our donors, we work with a ton of corporate sponsors and foundation partners, and the way that our sort of partnership models are set up are often in a way that spurs donations from individuals in addition to that partner. So for example, we offer gift cards, which I have a bunch of them today if anyone's interested. And those are a way for not just a corporation to give money, but to engage their employees in donating to DonorsChoose. A second thing I'll highlight is our model in general is kind of every project for itself is almost like its own membership model. We have a lot of feedback loops. Melody said this amazingly when we were preparing for the panel yesterday. But every project has its own feedback loop for the donors that give to that project, and that creates a really high level of personalization and recommendations for each individual donor. And the last thing I'll mention, and I'm happy to dive into any of these topics further, is that we really use like a join the club mentality. So in our emails to donors, we'll say, you know, you're one of 1,000 donors I've given to projects in this really specific neighborhood, or again, like I was saying, some of our partnership models, we do a lot of match offers, which is really like a join the club kind of thing. So happy to talk more about that.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Maris Kreisman. I'm a publishing and journalism outreach lead at Kickstarter. So Kickstarter is just a place where creative projects are funded. We love charity, but charities don't use our platform. But Kickstarter isn't just a place to raise money for a particular project that ends when the Kickstarter campaign ends. It's about crafting a story about your organization and then building a community that's interested in following and interacting with the creators that they're supporting. And it's also a way to have an ongoing conversation with the more than 9.3 million people who've supported projects on Kickstarter. So I'm a publishing and outreach lead. I started out as a book editor 15 years ago at Simon & Schuster. And so my job is sort of similar to what I was doing as a book editor, I think. Because I'm charged with going out and finding really great projects that I'm excited about and bringing them onto the platform, making our in-house team really excited about it, and then coming up with the strategy to make the rest of the world excited about it too. So I've worked with, at Kickstarter, I've worked with a bunch of indie publishers, including McSweeney's and Emily Books and Coffee House Press. I've worked with magazines like the Oxford American, and I've worked with online magazines like Guernica and Femsplain, which is a newly launched wonderful website that you should check out. And one of the things I do with these projects is that we work on a way to best put forth the three main components of a Kickstarter campaign. And those are, first is your story, which is just coming up with a great video and a project description to really craft the story that you want to tell about why you're doing the thing that you love to do. The second part is rewards, which, if they're done well, will provide direct access or unique opportunities to the people who back the project. And the third part of that is updates, and those can be usually through email. And that's about keeping momentum going while the project is live, but also continuing the conversation once the project is over, but the organization is growing or the publication is happening, and keeping in touch with the people who love your work. So I can talk more about that later. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Cool. Good morning, everybody. I have three names. My Western name is Noel, my Latin name is Noel, and my internet name is Nonek. So feel free to address me as either three of them, depending upon where you want to come from. Just a quick question. How many of you deal with data? Like raw, gooey data? Ooh, that makes me happy. And how many of you share your data with your audiences in the raw, in tabulated format? Wait, I'm sorry, how many hands are up there? Okay, so just to let you know, I'm the resident hacker on this panel. I'm the executive director of Beta NYC, and I'm also a fellow at Data and Society. So Beta NYC is focused on building a New York City government for the people, by the people, for the 21st century. We've essentially forked Code for America's mission statement because that's where we are coming from. We're part of the Code for America Brigade, which is a national program here, and then internationally it's called Code for All. But we are essentially your designers, developers, data scientists, community activists who are around the world trying to figure out how to build better, smarter, more inclusive communities using technology, data, and design. And so at Code for America, so that's what I do at Beta NYC. In the context of what we're doing, or what I'm doing at Data and Society, is that I'm taking the insights and the frustrations that I've had over the last 3 years and turning it into a boot camp for CUNY students, ironically enough, being here at CUNY, that will teach developing technologists how to use data, design, and technology to improve their communities. And here in New York City, we have this thing called community boards, which are local land use councils, more or less, to contextualize it. So how do we build a next generation of civic hackers or developers? And these are the people that you probably want to be capturing, or at least collaborating with, within your newsrooms. We love to look at data. We love to improve our communities. We love to take your articles and cite them, use them within testimony within our city halls. And so I'm here to kind of talk about what it is to be a member of this crazy community, this yet to be defined, properly defined community. How do we make money? Because right now we really don't make money at all. But how can we collaborate and kind of build a better and informed society? Because I think that's what we're all here in this room to do, and also figure out how to make money from it.
Awesome. So hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Catherine Minshew, and I'm one of the founders and the CEO of a technology platform based here in New York called The Muse. So The Muse is a platform that has helped over 40 million people get to the next step in their career. So building a better life through finding the right job, getting a promotion, or understanding what is the next professional step that they want to go. Our users are generally millennial, female skewing, and diverse. So we have 4 million people a month, average age 29, from all over the country, all sorts of different backgrounds. And they're generally drawn to us through word of mouth. Our growth has been totally organic, with the exception of the last month or two, from friends telling friends and other different channels. And what's been, I think, very interesting to me, and one of the things that resonated about this panel is that our community has really developed a group identity. People call themselves musers. They see themselves as part of this club. And what do they do on the site? They are reading career-related content, connecting with experts at other ways of solving their problems, browsing jobs, and looking at photo and video profiles of different companies and career paths. So we actually monetize in a relatively unique way, which is, or actually not so unique in the grand scheme of things, which is allowing hundreds and hundreds of companies, from Facebook and Uber to HBO, The Wall Street Journal, and Adidas, to hire great people off of our platform. And it's been a very kind of interesting ride. We're about to turn 4 years old, so we're a relatively new company here in New York, and we've learned a lot of things through duct tape and prayer. And yeah, I'm very, very excited to be here and to talk more about building audiences, creating community, and then developing a brand identity among people that often are very different from each other and very spread out across the country.
So I think this was great. Thank you. I think where I want to start is each of you kind of deal with two separate audiences on your platforms. So on Kickstarter, you're dealing with the people who are creating the campaigns as well as the people who would potentially donate to the campaigns. At Donors Choose, you have to think about teachers as well as people who might donate to the campaign. At Beta NYC and Code for America, you're talking about local government organizations or people who have open data, and then people who can contribute. And at the Muse, you're thinking about companies as well as the people on that site. So you're all juggling like two separate communities. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you think about building those separate communities and how you might think of each of those communities as an ambassador for your brand that talks about your brand or furthers what it is you're trying to do, which I think is something that every media organization could think about. How do we think of our audience, or how do we think of our journalists, or how do we think of the people who might be buying ads or underwriting as ambassadors for what we're trying to do? So why don't we just chug down the line? I would like everybody to answer this. Sorry to put you all on the spot. And then we can just go back and forth. So keep it loose.
So let me start with donors. So like I was saying before, we have every project on our site is kind of its own feedback loop. So let me talk through that process a little bit, because I think that will be helpful. So a donor kind of arrives at our site. They can search for any type of project that speaks to them. It can be anything from searching by grade level to really specifically where you live, to a book that you loved as a kid. And we found a lot, we've learned a lot over the years about personalization and what drives people to give on our site. Like kind of repeatedly or their first time, we find that location is really powerful. If you nail down into zip code, that gets 1,000,000 times more powerful. If you add affinity on top of that to a specific category or type of school or grade level, that is 14x what the baseline is for a state as like just that level of personalization. Then a donor, so I'll just say like one point just on the donor side is that we think a lot about personalization. Even if you give to a project, we then message you once a month recommending one really specific project to you again that plays off of the criteria of that first project you gave to. So going back to kind of the flow of a project, when a donor gives, they have the chance to leave a message for the teacher. So I'll just say, like, we rely on our teachers and donors in a lot of ways as a feedback loop for one another and creating a sense of community for each of these projects. So you're able to leave a message for the teacher saying why you gave to that specific project. That comment is posted on the project page. The teacher's notified when that comment is posted, and then a teacher can come back and respond to your comment really directly. We find the average response time is about, we just did some analysis on this, about 1.5 days from the teacher, and we've done analysis again where like if the teacher does respond to you quickly, your likelihood to give again does go up over time. Then when additional donations are added to this project, you are notified. And we tell you to share the project with your family and friends. So if there's another donation, we say, hey, there's only $100 to go left. You know, feel free to contribute again or share this with friends. We're so excited it's getting closer to the finish line. If their project is getting ready to expire, we send you another email saying, hey, you gave to the project, just letting you know it's about to expire. Feel free to share it. Again, this kind of idea of building that feedback loop in. When the project does get funded, the teacher writes a thank you letter online and posts digital photos of, and the materials are delivered to the school. The teacher has this really built-in feedback loop again for the donor where they post this thank you letter and photos from the student. We email the donor when that letter goes up. Again, the donor can leave a comment on the page and respond directly to that teacher. And finally, anyone who gives over $50 or finishes off a project gets handheld student thank you notes. So the teacher will have the students in their class write thank you notes to the donor, and we send those directly to the donor. The feedback loop continues after the project, like I was saying, with recommendations, but also if the teacher posts another project, we let you know. So on our donor side, we really rely on the information they're giving us and that relationship with the teacher to keep them on our site. And kind of when you think about email, our system emails bring in the majority of revenue from donors as opposed to campaigns, which we do, but those system emails are powerful. On the teacher side, I think we think a little more holistically. So not project by project, but we kind of prep. We're actually working on a lot of new stuff right now to give content to teachers around how to create a successful project or even more formalized like ambassador programs. But for teachers, we do incentivize them overall to share not just projects, but they have this thing called the teacher page. And they can share that page at any time and share it with donors or family members of their students or anyone in their community and customize that URL and have it be this page that, again, they can collect donations at any time. One other thing I'll call out on the teacher side is that for 2 projects a year, we incentivize teachers to share their projects in the first week that they're up. We find once the project's kickstarted, its likelihood of funding goes up. So we offer a match code to teachers in that first week. We send them an email saying any donation made up to $100 in this first week will match. That funding comes from partners and our board of directors, and we incentivize them to share. And again, we find teachers who do share their projects in those first few weeks, and about 50% of them do with that incentive, have a much higher likelihood of success.
That was great.
At Kickstarter, I think I'm in a unique position at Kickstarter because I work with publishing and journalism projects, and if you know about Kickstarter, that might not be the first category or the second that you think of when you think of Kickstarter. I think we are very well developed in the film world, in the design and technology world. And so it's now that we're starting to put a little more love into categories like publishing and dance and theater and crafts. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is that we are hosting events at our headquarters in Greenpoint. So we had a month in which I was in charge of running publishing events. So we had a panel called How to Pay Your Writers. And Sari Botten, who wrote a bunch for Scratch magazine, led a panel with small literary organizations who had done Kickstarters to talk about how to raise money to actually do the thing that is most important to do when you're in publishing. We held a panel about podcasting, getting started in podcasting. That was really popular. We had people from Gimlet Media and NPR and a bunch of indie podcasters come. And I think that was a way to start formulating ideas for people who might be creators on Kickstarter, but also as a way to start getting the people who back projects there and engaged and talking to each other. And the hope is that we can replicate that outside of just Brooklyn, New York, and work on expanding and doing more events too.
Cool. I love Greenpoint. I live in Greenpoint, so Greenpoint all the way. So this space is kind of historic because just down that hallway over there, maybe 5 years ago, we had an event here. How many of you know what an unconference is? Raise your hand. Social participation. Okay, good. About half of you. For those of you who don't know, it uses this thing called open space technology where you pretty much just throw up a board of rooms and times and you invite a bunch of people and then they kind of schedule the day. And so this particular theme was thinking about how data and technology could improve government, particularly New York City government. It was part of our an ongoing series that we have every year. And at this particular event, we invited government. We invited the city council member who was sponsoring the city's open data law. We invited the commissioner of the city's IT department, and then we invited what was then kind of the civic technologist, civic hacker community that was self-affiliating themselves. And I have to point to the gentleman who's sitting in the back row, Mika Sifri, for his team's help in helping us get this space, and as well as helping create kind of that initial community through Personal Democracy Forum. And so we invited all these people to the room, and we talked about how this day was going to be a safe space, which means that you can have your political ideas, you can have your prejudices of different things, but you cannot manifest them in the dialogue. You must treat everybody with respect and equality, and have some dialogue to more or less, let's discuss these issues. Let's understand that we're all here to achieve something. So, and in that room over there, we held a 2-hour-long session, which was more or less an open dialogue of why New York City should have an open data law. And it was just, you know, a very casual conversation where we could talk to the commissioner, we could talk to city council, and the public could express their feelings of, you know, why open data is important. We were able to get to that point because we had built a collaboration with the city's good government groups and the old blue hair activist organizations. You know, our older brothers and sisters are older cousins. And we were coming to this particular space because we were coming to understand that there is a huge opportunity to improve the city, but how do we get there? And so it's at time contentious, but we've framed it as a collaborative opportunity. And so if our community is the public, government, and there's different factors within government or factions within government and businesses, what Beta NYC has worked on establishing is kind of this neutral space where we're the Switzerland. Well, I was going to use the Star Trek reference, but Switzerland sided with the Nazis still in some way, form. So, you know, we're Babylon 5, the last greatest hope for peace in the universe. If we were to call New York City the universe, and for those of you who are really, really nerdy, you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, it's about figuring out, like, at least for us, for Beta NYC, and the things that we want to achieve at this particular moment is understanding that we're too nerdy for everybody to understand what we're talking about, but we at least get one thing, and that's equality. And so how do we create those particular spaces for collaboration and understanding that we're here to try to address these issues, not necessarily solve them always in that space. And you know, I can tell you 1,000 stories of how the others, no matter what story this is, always sees us as someone who's going to be a rebel rouser or disruptive. And we work hard to establish the fact that, no, we're here to be peaceful and talk about things rationally, and let's just talk about the issues and see what type of traction we can get.
Thanks. That was really good. Okay.
Yeah, so I think there's always an interesting inherent tension whenever you have two constituencies. For us, as Melody said, it's companies and users. So first of all, we decided really early on that ultimately we were going to be user first if the two came in conflict. And our reason for that is there are lots of reasons that a company might work with the Muse, but the first and most important reason is they want access to the best people, the most talented, engaged, driven people. And if we serve that side of our market first, we believe that ultimately the companies will benefit. But early on, when we were getting the marketplace started, we had to provide a lot of value upfront. And we thought to ourselves, what could we do to make it a valuable experience for companies to be on a recruiting and career development platform that does not have very many individuals? And we came up with two things. One was that we could help share best practices between companies, and especially from really large corporate companies to small startups and vice versa. And secondly, that we could actually help them create content. So we started tapping local photographer, videographers. We actually based our model on Airbnb. If anybody's been on the renter side, in most markets, Airbnb will actually offer to send a photographer to your home to take pictures, because they found that professionally taken photographs result in something like 3 to 4 times as many bookings as those that you might take with a smartphone yourself. We did something similar. We said, we're actually going to photograph the insides of companies, their offices, their employees, their inner workings, with a really high quality lens, so that both the companies can get intrinsic value from day one, and that people that then come to our platform can learn more about what it means to work at that company, and they can see inside that company. And it turned out to be I think, one of the more interesting elements. And then we've also found that there really are a lot of best practices that we're able to share between different types of companies. For example, we might notice through our data that company A converts 30% of people who look at a certain job listing, and company B only converts 4%. If we didn't notice that and communicate it, company B might say, I'm only getting this many applicants for a job, when actually part of the problem may be that their materials aren't getting the job done as effectively as it could be. And then when we think about shifting to the user side, it was really interesting for us early on. We wanted to provide a really differentiated experience. And so part of what we did was actually reach out to our users and ask them to be contributors early on. So when we launched the site at the very end of 2011, we did not have a lot of money, but we had a very crystal clear idea of what we wanted to do. And so I sent about 800 emails, slightly personalized, although obviously in form very similar, to industry groups, affiliate groups, student groups, alumni groups across the country. And many of them said, this is what we're launching. This is very kind of concisely, this is the mission, this is what we're trying to do. And I would love your feedback. I'm interested in your ideas for stories. If you really are passionate about this and you want to contribute, here's a link where you can learn more about actually writing. And we weren't actually in the early days able to compensate people that were contributing, but they bought into what we were doing and wanted to be part of it, which I think was very interesting when I was reading some of your research. You can kind of tap in. And it turned out that those people were actually our best advocates. Because if you've then spent time writing a story for the Muse, and in fact, we actually got some fantastic content that way, because instead of a reporter saying, here are the 10 lessons that most young professionals make in their first job, you'd have a manager who manages brand new grads every year for the past 10 years write, here are the same mistakes that people make every year in their first year out of college. And that person has such an incentive to share that piece, to tell their friends, to rally as an ambassador and an evangelist. And we were able to get a lot of our early word of mouth momentum, first through our outreach efforts and through asking people to be involved. People love to be asked for their opinion, to be honest, but also through turning our early readers and adopters into those megaphones for our product.
So I want to pick at something that you just said, and I think that Kickstarter and Donors Choose will also have interesting answers in this arena, which is the idea of providing some kind of personalized form of access. So what you just said was that people who use the Muse website get to see pictures of where they might be working, which says a lot about the culture of a company. And the best Kickstarter campaigns that I've seen are the ones that Roman Mars has run for PRX, because I receive personalized updates on what they're up to. And that could be anything from like, hey, we've made your t-shirts, like we're gonna send out your t-shirts, to like, hey, we're launching a new show. And they have this band of users who already supported them financially through the Kickstarter platform, and then continue to receive personalized updates and access to Roman that you wouldn't otherwise receive. And I see a lot of Kickstarter campaigns using access to the people creating the Kickstarter as an incentive or reward. And with Donors Choose, I think that the personalized messages that you've received from teachers, and I've contributed to Donors Choose, and the best part about it is like getting a really nice note from a teacher or like a second grader, because that's a personalized human connection that's individualized, and it really says, like, here's access that you wouldn't otherwise have into this classroom. And I think something that we can all think about today, taking a step back, is what kinds of access can we provide to people with regards to what's going on in our newsroom? Does that mean that we're running live chats with reporters? Does that mean we're using a platform where we can ask people what questions they would have? Does that mean that we're putting things up on GitHub so people can contribute in different ways? And I'm not going to go through all of the different ways, but I'd probably list like 100 of them in my report with ways to really get people to think about access and becoming more involved. And I was just wondering if the three of you could talk a little bit about the kind of access that people get to the founders or the teachers or the companies, and how that incentivizes them, or how that makes them feel more of a member of the community.
I can start. Anybody who backs a Kickstarter campaign is signed up for updates from the creator of the project. And those updates are key in terms of backers want to understand the creative process. They want to know the nitty-gritty, where the t-shirts are, what's happening with the editing process, whatever it is. They also want new information. They want a video, perhaps, of a famous person endorsing the product, or if you don't have a famous person around, a video of your studio, the place where you write and what you're passionate about there. And then going on, like what Roman Mars did.
Could you talk a little bit about what he did, because I'm not sure everybody here.
Yes. So there are a couple of things. Roman Mars launched a Kickstarter for, I think, the 4th season of his radio show 99% Invisible, which is an architecture show. And he raised a lovely amount of money, but he also got people who became mega fans of the show. And they did buy merch. I will say that, even though that's not something that I often suggest that Kickstarter creators do. So people have the misconception, I think, that a tote bag is the best reward to give, especially on Kickstarter. And the truth is that the access is more important. The experiential rewards are more important. And I'm not sure if Roman did this, but I do think
Could you talk a little bit about others who have done it? Like maybe 2.
Yeah, I mean, so here's a variety. Here's a spectrum. McSweeney's had some of their best contributors. Sheila Heti would write a short story for you, or one of the authors would have a 10-minute Skype with you, or another author might send you a personalized book recommendation list. Events are really good. Tours of an office. Being one of the first beta user for a website that's launching. All of these things provide unique access.
That reminds me, I interviewed the Smithsonian as part of my project, and they have people transcribe stuff. And the only thing those people receive in return is a Google Hangout with a Smithsonian curator, and they can't give those people material quickly enough. People love the Smithsonian. People think of the Smithsonian as part of their identity. They get to chat with somebody who studies butterflies for a living. People really like that. It doesn't cost the Smithsonian anything.
And I just to one more point.
Yeah.
So when Roman Mars went on to launch Radiotopia, which is the network of podcasts that he and a bunch of other people started, he was able to get in touch with all of the people who backed his previous Kickstarter and said, look at this wonderful new initiative that we're doing, become a part of it. And that was one of the most successful podcast projects on Kickstarter.
Great, thank you. Catherine, do you have anything to add?
I did, and then I totally
okay.
lost it.
Okay, that's good. We'll just move on. Yeah, no.
I dropped my water bottle. So
good.
I just want to
I'll
talk
grab it for you.
about kind of like access in how we, thank you, how we've been able to create it. So one of the things that we launched this year was a forum, an online forum called talk.beta.nyc, which is just, it's one of our safe spaces that we have. Not only do we have a physical safe space, so we have weekly meetups. Yes, we meet up every single week, like 50 weeks out of the year. We have a room like this where people just come together to work on their different projects. And then we have that same space in a digital way. So we use this open source platform called Discourse. We've deployed it at talk.beta.nyc, and we've invited more or less the same type of people who we would normally have, whether they're elected officials, whether they're staff of the elected officials, newsmakers, to come into this particular space and to collaborate on different projects. And so one of the questions that Melanie was talking to us about was about benefit of, like what is the benefit for people to engage in these particular spaces? And it's really just social credit. And so people are able to scrape data and throw that out there in a community platform and then talk about what are the inconsistencies of the data and have newsmakers come in, whether it's elected officials or whether it's journalists themselves, be able to take that data and then talk about how this particular issue that they happen to be really, really passionate about is affected. And what's amazing about Talk is that, you know, you have people just messaging. It's kind of like a little private Twitter, right? So people are messaging back and forth, and we've got the city CIO and the city's chief analytics officer engaging with data scrapers and different agencies, just kind of engaging with each other, with journalists also having these conversations that are there. And so, yeah.
I want to build on something that you just said. So as part of this project, I talked to the people who created Code for America, because I thought Code for America is a really interesting organization. They have fellows who are paid, who go into cities and they work with the cities. And then they have these volunteer, what they call brigades, but they're just like meetups or groups. And they're volunteers. So they'll go once a month and they'll meet, and they'll meet with local governments, so they'll meet with nonprofits, and they'll say, how can we help you? And the nonprofit says, I want to create a website. We don't have the capacity to do that. And then these people work on the project for them or with them. And I said to the guy who I talked to from Code for America, whose name is Jack, who was one of the founders, I said, how do you incentivize like both sides to participate? Because when I've talked to public media stations, people will say, well, we can't give people access to that. Like that's private. If we allow people access to various parts of our process, then where does the journalist fit in? Or are people going to replace us in our newsrooms? And the local governments had the same fear. So people were very, very fearful and apprehensive of these people coming in and working with them, particularly with data. And they did a couple of things that strengthened the trust building. One of them was that they used Twitter as a platform for communication, so that people in local governments could actually see the conversations that these civic hackers were having on Twitter, because it was entirely open. 2, they said the first project that we'd like any civic hacker to do with a city is with open data. So what data can you release? And we're going to give these people who are developers or designers during their day access to this data, and they're going to build something for you, and it's going to be really cool, and they're going to be able to build it really quickly. And by doing that and having a working prototype, you can kind of say to people, look, this is what you're going to get. Like this is the end goal of working with the public. This is something, what it looks like. And sometimes if you work in an organization where people are hesitant to do things like this, showing them something that works very quickly, even if it's small, builds trust and makes them understand what you're about to do. And the third thing they said was the people who are volunteering for these projects have day jobs where they might work at a Google or a Microsoft during the day, but if you're low on the totem pole at one of those organizations, you're not doing cool stuff. You're like a cog in this giant organizational machine, and the stuff that you were like hacking on during college is not the stuff you're doing during your day job. And you want to do that stuff. Like you want an opportunity to meet people who do that stuff. And you might not be religious, you might not go to a bar. You know, where do you meet people your age in your 20s if not online? So these spaces that were created that pair individuals with cities really did a magnificent job of creating spaces that were designed to strengthen relationships between the people who were attending and give them friends. And you know, these might be more introverted people. So I thought it was a really good idea, and I think it's something particularly that public media stations could do because we have those spaces.
Audie, can I add one more thing to the
go
question
ahead.
you asked us? I'll just say that like something that Catherine mentioned before stood out to me. We're super democratic about opening up opportunities to everybody. So like Noel was asking as well, like we have open source data. We'll put out surveys in our teacher newsletter where we're asking everybody for their feedback and report back on it. Same thing, we're opening some stuff up around contributors. And I think that your best people will bubble up to the top when you open up opportunities in that way. And our approach is not to give like a ton more access to one person over the other, but to provide opportunities, see who bubbles up, and then cultivate those relationships.
Yeah, and it's amazing the excitement that you can get from someone in your user base when their idea is turned into an article or their suggestion is taken. I really think I think something you said, that a lot of people are doing it for either the social ties or the social credit of saying, that was my idea, I wrote that piece, I made that suggestion, I was part of that group or that movement. And anything that you can do as an organization to give people that sense of meaning or pride in their membership, I think returns in spades in their willingness to advocate for you and share your mission with others.
Right, and it's a mistake to think you have to pay people or bring money into the mix. I actually think a lot of the time value is a lot more valuable to people, or feeling that sense of pride or recognition.
And I want to add one other word, patience. How many of you, I almost want to ask you the question, then survey you, how many of you that do data news stories develop them within 1 week and then publish them within 1 week? How many of you wow, okay. How many of you can do a data news story within a month? Okay, so how many does it take longer? All right, a few more hands. Not everybody's awake yet, so sorry. But from my point, from working with journalists here in New York City, data news stories take more than a month to kind of to go through its life cycle, to check the data again, check other different resources. And so developing these types of relationships that you've done within journalism are the same things that we have to do as civic hackers to liberate some of the data. And so it's figuring out, like, let's be patient to develop the network, to develop the community, to develop the conversation, and yeah.
So I think we have about 15 more minutes, and I want to make sure we get to 2 points. So I'm going to ask everybody to keep their answers to like a minute or two, just so we can get to these 2 points. And I'll just list them, and then we'll chug through them. So the first is, like, you create a project, people are really excited. How do you maintain that momentum? So how do you get people to come back, or how do you incentivize people to come back? And that leads into the second question, which I'm going to ask, which is about incentives. So each of your organization uses incentives in some way, social incentives or actual rewards in terms of a Kickstarter. How do incentives engage audiences, motivate them to contribute, and are incentives necessary? So ignore that question for the time being. Let's go back to the first one. How do you motivate people to come back? And what do successful projects share? And we'll use Kickstarter as an example. Kickstarter's most successful campaigns range from, like, stereo systems to a card game to a podcast campaign, completely different audiences, completely different products, but they all share, like, key elements. Could you talk a little bit about how those projects sustain themselves over the course of their project?
So I want to define what a project is, actually,
Yeah.
because most Kickstarter campaigns are 30 days.
Okay.
That's the amount of time that we found works best. But I think the more important time for a campaign is everything that comes after it. And so we've made a big push to have, once a campaign is over, to have a thing that we call the Spotlight page, which is where a creator can update what they're doing, where people can buy the thing that they're selling if they're making a book or a movie or something like that, and get further updates. So it's really a home base. It's not something that's constantly in flux. And I do think that incentives are very important to Kickstarter. It's a value exchange, and people most often just want the thing that people are making, whether that's a book or a magazine. And beyond that, I think that being a part of the experience that is crucial to the success of a really good Kickstarter campaign.
That's great.
I can jump in on something that Jeff mentioned around kind of drive and changing, sort of thinking about different drives that people have. I'll say our biggest way for retention is to think about personalization and the individual person's drive. So what are we sending them? What are we showing them in the future based on what they've contributed to in the past? As well as if their drive is through the teacher. You know, we're actually going to be coming out with some new stuff in the next year on, like, how that conversation can continue even further between the teacher and the donor. On the incentive side, I'll just call out that idea of joining the club and match offers. So we've found that for example, we just did a huge partnership with Gates that went, the Gates Foundation, on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of this weekend, where every single project on our site, there was a promo code that Gates would match donations to those projects. And we found that concept really never gets old to our community of donors, because to feel like it's an amazing incentive to give if you feel like someone else is contributing a piece of the pie. So we have 2 different formats of that for partners. We have or 3, we have these promo codes, we have these match offers that can show up on a bunch of different projects that relate to a specific set of criteria. So it could be AP high school projects in New York City that Chevron wants to support, and then people see a match offer on all of those projects. And the third is something we call Almost Home, which is that a partner will contribute up to the $99 point on a project, and someone else can contribute that $99 to finish it off. And again, that goes to this concept of like joining in with other people around something you all care about. So if a partner is restricting what they're giving to around something they care about, whether it relates to the specific city where they have offices or the cause that they are most concerned about, if they're a foundation or something like that, they'll be able to then drive people in their community to those projects because they care about the same thing that they do, and we're able to help the people who come to our site like organically, who share the same excitement to those projects. And I've talked to a lot of teachers. I've done like tons of teacher interviews on our site too, and the teachers who are the most effective fundraisers on our site on their own use the exact same mentality of personalization and drive, and they will, if they put a project up about Twilight series books, they will go on Reddit and find the Twilight series Reddit forum, and they will tell people to donate to their project. They'll think about their kids' friends whose parents love Twilight. They'll think really, really specifically, not just about like where, but like these motivations for the individual.
I just want to say one thing about that. I was giving a presentation at the New York Times a while ago, and we were talking about like analytics, and we were talking about how NPR, which is where I used to work, and the New York Times think like the entire world is the audience for an article. Whereas if an article is about, let's say, horses, the audience for that article are people who care about horses. The way that news articles are currently designed is like I receive the same news article no matter what demographic I'm in. So if I go to the New York Times website right now and I look at the front page, Jeff and I are going to see the exact same article in the exact same way, even though we're like slightly different demographics. We're both from South Jersey. But water. But I think that what Donors Choose and what the Muse do particularly well is they personalize this experience depending on who is coming to the site. So they learn information about who is on this platform, and somebody might receive a slightly different newsletter, or somebody might receive a slightly different experience. And personalization and the ability to say, what can we learn about this person? What are their interests? And then how do we even think about the article as a type of material and change that potentially for them in terms of news? In terms of these organizations, it's changing the communication tactics or strategies with the potential donors.
And one thing I'll add to that is we're starting to see that a really important part of personalization is actually giving the person an opportunity to tell you whether you've gotten it right. Something that we hear all the time from frustrated users of other job search or career development platforms, I won't call anyone out by name, but they'll say, I started my career as a financial analyst, and I moved into, let's just say, media or something else, and I love it, and now I know where I'm going, and I know which direction I'm heading in, and every single recommended job or recommended article that I get is about a financial analyst position. That's not what I want anymore. That's not what I'm doing, and yet some algorithm has decided that somewhere in my history this word appeared more than 3 times, and therefore it must be an interest. So I also think that where applicable, it's really powerful to tell someone, is this right? Do you in fact like horses or finance planning? And by giving people that chance to engage, again, I think it's a touch point that allows them to feel a connection. One of the most powerful things for us has been almost personifying the brand of the Muse and the experience people have on the Muse. A lot of our users come to us and they say, I feel like you're my kind of confidant in the office. You're the person that I go to when I have a question if I don't have someone that can answer this in my day-to-day life. And I think the more that you can create that sense that they're getting an experience for them and their interests and the world that they live in, I think the more of a powerful connection you can build.
So I always end panels with this question, and I'll ask you all in the audience to think about this too. And we have like 5 minutes, so like a minute each. How do you share what you've learned? Like if you learned something, or if you learned, are you sharing that with your audience? Are you sharing, I'm a very public person. When I worked at NPR, I ran an internal, then external newsletter that shared everything we were learning about digital and social strategy, which helped us and situated us as a leader talking about these topics, even if we weren't actually doing them. And I think that working in public is a tactic that we can use to kind of strengthen our organizations and the work that we do. And I'm wondering if you could, not necessarily sharing, trade secrets or something, but if you learn something, how do you share that?
So anyone from WNYC out here? Thank you. So I think WNYC, their data news team and some of the other cool projects that they've done online are really cool. Like if you haven't seen their cicada tracker program that they did last year, and then there was like this interactive sleep program where you could essentially study your sleep and compare that with your audience sleep. I think WNYC has done a lot of great examples of kind of doing it in the open, doing it in a way that's more participatory and sharing kind of like those insights. So they use GitHub to share their code, they use GitHub to share their data, they talk about that in blog posts and other posts that are online, so that way that information can be shared and reused and people can kind of see what's going on. We try to do the same thing within our project, so we try to make all of our issues available online, we try to make sure that the data is available online, we are very open about the problems that we're having when we're scraping the data, because a lot of the data that we're dealing with is government data, or at least institutional data, that there are going to be a lot more people that once we liberate it, we want them to use it, so we want them to know the inconsistencies within the data or the issues that are within the data. We host a community data portal called data.beta.nyc, which is exclusively designed to more or less to clean up government or institutional data. And we have it integrated with our forum so that way people can talk about those inconsistencies. We have a subgroup, a working group that's dedicated just to data, so that way people can find out what are the issues within this underlying data that we all use for all of our reports, journalism, or projects. So that way people can just learn from each other and they're not wasting each other's time. And I think that that's like, what are the things that you can do in public? You don't want to share your grandmother's recipe, but it doesn't, you don't want to share the recipe and your special pots and pans, but at least you can talk about some of the issues and what are the ovens that you use.
I just want to make sure everybody.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
I'll be very brief and say I'm leaving here to go back to Kickstarter to do a Google chat with a successful book creator and letting the audience ask questions and hoping that everyone can learn from that experience.
Two things just to call that we do have our impact page. Our data is open source. We have a data blog where we share analysis that we do sort of in an ongoing way. We released something yesterday. And we, in our teacher newsletter, we do a lot of surveys, and we'll always make sure to share back those results the month after or call out some of the best ideas that came from those, so creating feedback loops for individual things. I'll say what we don't currently do well is, and that actually I've been kind of hired to do in the next year, is channel what our users have learned, because our teachers know way more than we do about creating a successful project on our site and in their classrooms. And we really want to bring their voice to the forefront even more than ours. So we'll be doing a lot more around that this year.
Yeah, and I'll just say we have subgroups of constituents where we constantly will share. For some of them, it's a bi-weekly newsletter. For some of them, it's informal chats. Here's what we learned. Here's what we're grappling with. I really enjoy sharing, actually, here's what we're in the middle of learning, because that's often a very kind of exciting way for other people to jump in with, okay, both I want to learn that, but also here's my contribution. And then you get the benefit of more people's knowledge.
So we'll be around all day. I tweeted out our Twitter handles if you want to get in touch with any of the panelists, but thank you very much. I really appreciate it.